Hello, God bless you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is for you as you watch this. It's very early in the morning here as I record this. My name's Stephen. I'm the pastor of Graffiti Fellowship in Brooklyn, New York, and it's time for today's daily devotion. And our daily devotions, this is just where we take a chapter from the Bible each day and read it together. We generally post these 5 days a week, but these are around for what they call posterity, right? So these videos are saved in playlists and you can access them at any time. But our encouragement is these are on average about 10 minutes, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. But we hope this is a tool to help you spend time in God's Word regularly. And we think 5 days a week is a great goal to have. And so hopefully these are a blessing to you and of some help. We're reading the Gospel of Mark in this particular series. And today we're reading Mark chapter 8. And this puts us right at the halfway point in Mark's gospel. And it's this chapter, it's about average length. Looks like it's 38 verses. And the subsections that we will read in Mark chapter 8 are Jesus feeds the 4,000. This is a separate event. 2 chapters ago, we read Jesus feeding the 5,000. It sounds very similar, but this is a second event, second occurrence. Pharisees demand a miraculous sign is another subsection. Yeast of the Pharisees and Herod is another. Jesus heals a blind man. Peter's declaration about Jesus. Jesus predicts his death. All of that we're going to cover today in this chapter. Mark chapter 8 begins. About this time, another large crowd had gathered, and the people ran out of food again. Jesus called his disciples and told them, I feel sorry for these people. They've been here with me for 3 days, and they have nothing left to eat. If I send them home hungry, they'll faint along the way, for some of them have come a long distance. His disciples replied, how are we supposed to find enough food to feed them out here in the wilderness? It sounds familiar, right? Jesus asked, how much bread do you have? 7 loaves, they replied. So Jesus told all the people to sit down on the ground. Then he took the 7 loaves, he thanked God for them, and he broke them into pieces. He gave them to his disciples, who distributed the bread to the crowd. A few small fish were found too, so Jesus blessed those and told the disciples to distribute them. They ate as much as they wanted, and afterward the disciples picked up 7 large baskets of leftover food. There were about 4,000 people in the crowd that day, and Jesus sent them home after they had eaten. Immediately after this, he got into a boat with his disciples and crossed over to the region of Dalmathua. Verse 11, when the Pharisees heard that Jesus had arrived, they came and started to argue with him. Testing him, they demanded he show them a miraculous sign from heaven to prove his authority. When he heard this, he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, why do these people keep demanding a miraculous sign? I tell you the truth, I'll not give this generation any such sign. So he got back in the boat and left them, and he crossed to the other side of the lake. But the disciples had forgotten to bring any food. They only had 1 loaf of bread with them in the boat, and as they were crossing the lake, Jesus warned them, watch out, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod. At this, they began to argue with each other because they hadn't brought any bread. Jesus knew what they were saying, and he said, why are you arguing about having no bread? Don't you understand? Don't you know even yet? Are your hearts too hard to take it in? You have eyes, can't you see? You have ears, can't you hear? Don't you remember anything at all when I fed the 5,000 with the 5 loaves of bread? How many baskets of leftovers did you pick up afterward? 12, they said. And when I fed the 4,000 with 7 loaves, how many large baskets of leftovers did you pick up? 7, they said. Well, don't you understand yet? He asked them. When they arrived at Bethsaida, some people brought a blind man to Jesus, and they begged him to touch the man and heal him. Jesus took the blind man by the hand and led him out into the village, and then spitting on the man's eyes, he laid his hands on him and asked, "Can't you see anything now?" The man looked around. "Yes," he said, "I see people, but I can't see them very clearly. They look like trees walking around." Then Jesus placed his hands on the man's eyes again, and his eyes were opened. His sight was completely restored, and he could see everything clearly. And Jesus sent him away, saying, "Don't go back into the village on your way home." Verse 27, Jesus and his disciples left Galilee and went up to the village near Caesarea Philippi. As they were walking along, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" "Well," they replied, "some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, others say you're one of the other prophets." Then he asked them, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter replied, "You are the Messiah." Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. Then Jesus began to tell them about the Son of Man and how he must suffer many terrible things and be rejected by the elders, the leading priests, the teachers of the religious law. He would be killed, but 3 days later he would rise from the dead. As he talked about this openly with his disciples, Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him for saying such things. Jesus turned around and looked at his disciples, and then he reprimanded Peter. "Get away from me, Satan," he said. "You're seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's." Then, calling the crowd to join his disciples, he said, "If any of you wants to be my follower, you must turn from your selfish ways, take up your cross, and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you'll lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake and for the sake of the good news, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my message in these adulterous and sinful days, the Son of Man will be ashamed of that person when he returns in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." That's the end of Matthew chapter 8. And once again, a lot happening in this chapter, a whole lot to ponder and to learn from. But one of the things that I'm really struck by is, Jesus again feeding the 4,000. We read in a previous chapter how the hearts of the disciples had been too hard for them to fully comprehend the magnitude of the miracle that Jesus performed when he fed the 5,000 in Matthew chapter 6. In Mark chapter 6. And here it is again. And their hearts go back to the same place. They're in the same situation. They got a crowd of people in a remote place who need the same provision, and their response is exactly the same. "Oh, we could never find enough food to feed these people." Instead of at least, just remembering what had recently happened and saying, "Jesus, can we ask God to do this again? We know what he's capable of." And that's human nature, and I think we're all very, very susceptible to that. So let's be on guard against it. Let's have soft hearts, and let's ask God to keep our hearts soft. And that's one of the reasons we do these things. That's what daily devotion is all about, spending time with the Lord daily so that our hearts can become continually softer, so that we're aware of who he is and what he's doing, not only to bless our lives, but to bless the lives of others. Thanks so much for participating in this video as we've covered Mark chapter 8, and I look forward to seeing you next time for Mark chapter 9. God bless you.